right. Good evening, Dave. Can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good.
We can't see you though, so it's kind of weird.
Yeah, Gwen's
Do you
the
guys
only one
want
that
to
can
see
see.
him?
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Gwen's gonna turn her laptop toward us.
Oh, okay.
We're in the downstairs room without the big screen.
It's gonna be confusing for now.
I know.
Well, I've not much to look at. I'm getting over COVID. I've been in a kind of a fog the last 4 days, so I hope I'm useful tonight.
Well, I'm glad you're
Get
getting
better.
over COVID.
Okay, so how do we want to go through this? Do we want to start right at the top and go through everything, you know, do this line by line, or do we just want to hit the high points and go right for the?
Well, I think
Go right for the good
David
stuff.
prepared all of those maps, so I think you guys should go through the maps and kind of talk about what they mean and what they're showing in terms of location preferences and suitability. And then from there, that will feed into the spots in the bylaw where that can feed into it.
And could we also talk about the GIS mapping that you did
Yeah.
too?
The buffer map.
The
Yeah.
100, 250 and 500.
So the one thing, to that point, the buffer mapping, one thing I noticed so it looks like the buffer mapping is buffer from property line.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes,
The bylaw says setback distance from structure.
from structure. Okay,
So there's an important distinction there.
there's a difference,
Yeah.
yes.
I think that's a decision point for us. David, do you have a recommendation on that? Should your setback be from a structure or from a property line?
Sometimes it depends on what the size of the setback is and what the purpose of the setback is. If we're talking about trying to get visual isolation, especially in a town like Lenox, there are plenty of places where the nearest structure is nowhere near the property line, and you have a lot of isolation in terms of woods or terrain. So that in that case, it would be structures. In terms of the concerns expressed by some residents, structures are where the people are. And it would, I think, be an effective compromise to come up with a number if the mapping shows it's possible, that relates to structures rather than to property lines.
There's a problem with structures, which is property lines are recorded with deeds and don't change, and I could build I could tear my house down and build in another location, and then the distance from the structures changed.
But that would be a self-imposed hardship because you're doing it after the fact.
I guess it just seems to me,
That's why we treat situations like that.
but then you've sort of taken away someone's property rights if they want to be that distance from a cell tower and they have a structure, but they have a right to build another structure, except now it'll be closer than the preferred distance from
Yeah.
the cell tower.
Yeah.
So I think, to me, it seems that heads us for trouble down the road.
I don't think it's in the denser parts of town, it's not gonna make much of a difference.
That's probably
Because if we look at a 250 foot buffer around property, when you look in the most dense parts of town, it isn't gonna make any difference if it's setback from property line or setback from a structure. So that was kind of my thought, I just wanted to make sure that distinction got pointed out, because I spotted it in the bylaw. And I thought, geez, I wonder what the maps are. I bet you the maps are.
Their property line, yep.
Okay. So we want to talk about his driving.
I haven't seen that. Gwen, did you share that?
It's in the meeting packet that's on our
okay.
website.
I sent you the link today, David.
Yeah.
I know I realize now you've been left on.
If people have looked at this on
It's
the
in
town
the
website,
binder.
they have the whole thing.
Yes.
Likewise, so at
It
least
should
my
be the map
buffer stuff is in section 2,
Kate
Yeah.
says it's in section 2. In your,
and the maps are
Okay.
in section
Never get through.
3. So are we looking at maps of buffers first?
Well, let's look at the maps.
I thought it was a really kind of honed in free, what you did, Mr. Maxim. So I really appreciated the focus, like this part of this and it's that part of that, for the most part. And I did appreciate their signing. And it's explanatory material as well.
Yeah.
So my sense of these mappings, so David, we're talking about the thing that you guys did of the various, mostly town sites. And my sense is that, I mean, maybe you can talk about what you think they showed. My sense, and maybe it's wrong, is that in a lot of these situations, even putting up 100-foot tower in these various locations, it's not like the signal covered all of Lenox. Looks like there was topography or whatever. I mean, is there some sort of summary you could make from what you saw in the mapping?
Yeah, I think you have a number of sites that are good opportunities in the southeast part of town. And, you know, we've looked at that with the different heights. And then the added site that you called, what, Sawmill? Which is, that's a planned location for public safety.
Yes.
That could be an ideal situation. There's already going to be some extensive development for a fire station or whatever it is that'll be going there. They may want or need a tower anyway. And the coverage footprint from that location, as I recall, was pretty good for that.
Is that parcel 54, parcel 54?
Yes.
Yes. I talk and look it up at the same time, and I'm not good at multitasking, so just a moment.
And clearly, in the permanent building committee consultants report, there's definitely a tower on the site.
I don't know that at this point. There'll probably be
I asked
something.
a question about it at the last meeting about the location of it on the, yeah, it'll be located somewhere on that site.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, but it's already planned for the site.
Well, it's a communications tower.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily a cell tower.
Did I say so?
No.
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 And is
I
that?
just wanted to make that,
Yeah, absolutely.
distinction clear.
It's a public safety
Yeah.
communications tower, which has a different,
Is that this parcel right here?
right into the bike, yeah.
Yeah, it's also got like a lot of clearance on setbacks.
Parcel.
Sawmill.
Yeah, because this is,
It disappears at 500 feet.
yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot
just
disappears at
Yeah.
500
Yep.
feet.
yeah.
So it's this one.
Apparently. And that's from lines, not structures.
It's that one.
And that's right in the middle.
So Dave, the interesting thing that I noticed was that, in most all these maps, and I guess it doesn't, I guess maybe it varies with the height a little bit, or maybe it doesn't. The radius or the diameter of green for most all these locations, depending on where they are and the heights and all of that, the diameter of the best coverage or the best signal is only about a mile,
Mhm.
a half-mile radius around the tower. Is that, so if you go up higher, how much does that change? And you go up, instead of 100 feet, you make it 250 feet.
The reason for going higher is to reach over terrain. So if there is if there's no sharp cutoff of like green, yellow, blue, where it goes green, yellow, blue real quick, and that occurs at the top of a ridge, and behind the ridge there's a shadow. But if it's kind of gradually going green, yellow, blue, then it's not a terrain obstruction, it's just distance. And the other thing the computer takes into account is is the morphology, or what they call the clutter. It attempts to predict the impact of vegetation and structures. So an open wetland will have less attenuation than a heavily wooded area would. And that's one of the reasons for the irregularities of the patterns that you see, in addition to the fact that the terrain affects the pattern as well.
So David, are you saying, because I kind of got lost for a second there, are you saying that if it takes a little bit while for it to go from green, then to yellow, then to blue, that making the tower taller is probably not going to get you much?
Right.
That's
Correct.
well, yes.
All right.
Good.
When we're writing our bylaw and we're talking about height, I mean, most bylaws seem to have 100, 120, or 135 feet as the tower height, but then there's usually a waiver involved. Is that for, if it can be demonstrated that it will dramatically improve coverage, and or is it for the further co-location of like other providers on the tower or something like that?
In a word, yes. Sometimes it's especially if it's like 100-foot, where if you have a white pine, they could be 100 feet tall. So you might need to get it higher just to get the first carrier above the tree line, and then you would have no room for a second carrier. Or it might be that you're in deciduous trees that are 55, 65 feet high, and in that case, the 100 feet might be adequate for a couple of carriers. But you might decide that this particular site that's being proposed could stand having a 120-foot tower instead of a 100-foot tower, in order to maximize co-location on the tower because of the visual analysis. And so one of the things that I see in bylaws that we try to avoid is this kind of this hard and fast statement that you shall maximize the use of this cell tower for co-location. And so applicants come in and they say, well, you say they got to maximize it. So I'm making it big enough to handle 5 wireless carriers. So I need 150 feet. But if you do it with the tension built in, which is we want to maximize co-location to reduce the probability of having lots of towers, but at the same time, we want to minimize height in order to maintain or optimize height in order to maintain a limitation on the visual impact of the community. So you might end up approving a 120-foot tower at a particular location, and it could handle perhaps 4 carriers. And maybe the 4th carrier won't get a really good coverage, but they'll get something, and they'll prefer that over trying to build a new tower.
Do you in a bylaw recommend that we put in 100, 120, something like that, and then put in these caveats and give the zoning board leeway to address the tension?
Yes, definitely. If you're going to have a height that's restrictive, in order to avoid having sort of dueling applications where you have an application for a variance and for a special permit, if you give the board the flexibility to waive the height to a second alternative height, you avoid having to go down the variance road. And under state law, the variances are very strictly, defined, and it's only under a quirky interpretation of federal law that towns grant variances, quote unquote variances, for things like dimensional relief on the height of a tower. So long-winded answer. Basically, yes, if you're going to set a height limit, also put in the escape valve that you need to, with additional evidence, accept a greater height.
Okay. I think we've heard you loud and clear from before, and most of the variance language is taken out of the bylaw and substituted with the word waiver, because we really aren't talking about dimensional variances typically, that we typically see in structural additions in zoning and board applications. So we're there, I think. David, do you think that it's likely, given our topography and the way that you're mapping, the results of your mapping of these different sites, that we'll get applications? I mean, also given the fact that we're rural in nature with not a high population. I mean, if we needed X number of towers to really cover the topography, are we really likely to get applications for those things, given, again, our low population?
Right. It's a great question because as we've seen, especially in Western Massachusetts, central and Western Massachusetts, there's not enough population to support a full network build out. We're seeing more of that happening. AT&T with its FirstNet program is doing a lot of development in the western counties in places where there's precious little population, but they at least want to cover the centers of activity and the secondary through roads and that sort of thing. So if we were to look at, I'm just trying to pick a model here. All right, we did one with parcel 54, and if you're a baby boomer, you'd know what parcel 54, or are you, comes from, but
Par
that's
54?
right. That's correct. Yes, yes.
So how far along in the map here?
Yeah.
All right, more
So-
colorful.
So if we could see the one where we did that with the town hall, and we just
Mhm.
picked the town hall because it's a town location in the center of town. Doesn't have to be town hall, but
So the one that's parcel 54 and the town hall, it's the last
Yeah.
map.
Yeah.
Just those two. Yeah.
so you may have a better picture in your mind's eye where the
Mhm.
development is. Yeah, let me look at
It's not exactly where the circle is.
No.
What's parcel 53?
That's the sawmill site, and on the
That was the
map,
last
and on the
mapping.
map, it's really not
Yeah.
shown right.
Yeah,
It's closer
shown at
to,
the corner of the.
it's closer to East Street.
Yeah.
Oh, it's in the
Yeah,
wrong
it's
location.
Way down.
It needs to be, but it doesn't, it really doesn't. For this discussion, I don't think it really matters. I
No.
mean, you're talking
From a
about,
topographic.
So it's up here?
Along the
Yeah.
line.
Is it up here right there?
Drops a little bit. not
This is where it
much.
is?
no,
No, it's up by
I mean,
the curvy part of
back by
720.
the bypass, back by the intersection.
Yeah.
It's shown way down on Housatonic Street, kind of closer to
So
the
is it
East
right
Street.
here?
Here.
Oh,
I
okay.
would
further
feel
up.
like the cemetery.
Oh, so parcel 54 is
No,
just,
it's not even down that.
so it's
Yeah,
really
it
just to the
hasn't
right a little
crossed
bit.
the,
This is,
That's
To the
right.
left.
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's in the same block. He's just got it on the wrong
Right.
side of the block.
Right.
Yeah.
okay. We went straight to the assessor's maps on GIS and pulled the coordinates off it. So
Well, that's
It's
really
close
good.
enough. We can still talk about it.
Yeah.
okay.
Kind of my neighborhood, so I'm a little surprised it's down there, but anyway, I know
Yeah.
the guy who lives on that corner, he'll be surprised he's going to have the tower.
So go ahead,
Well, wait a
David.
minute, let me just,
I'm teasing.
yeah, but.
Yeah.
The folks in the crowd are hearing it a different way, I think, so I just want to make this distinction clear. All these maps, this mapping that's been done in town, all this is hypothetical. This isn't necessarily where a tower's gonna go, it's where a tower perhaps could go. We don't have the ultimate, the planning board, the town, has really no authority or control other than the zoning controls. A carrier decides ultimately where they want to put a tower, what's going to work best for them and for the coverage. We, the planning board, can put constraints on, that's what we're doing now. So I want to make that, all these maps that we're talking about, these are all just hypothetical locations, just to get an idea of you know, where an ideal site might be, but, you know, a carrier's gonna come in, they're not gonna use any of this, they've got all their own technology and everything for trying to determine what the best location is.
Although if they know that we're open to the use of municipal sites,
Right,
that,
Right.
which is stated in our preferences as it now stands,
right.
that could come up in their early surveys of where it might be workable for all parties.
Agreed, yeah.
If I can just looking at that municipal track, if there are sites where there is a consensus in the town that it would be okay or at least tolerable to have a cell tower, it would be a great idea to also put those forth as sites in a warrant article, giving the select board the authority to entertain leasing those sites. Because the process of leasing town property to a cellular company or to a tower company is a disposition of public property, and therefore needs to have town meetings approval before the select board can enter into a lease. In some cases, what we've seen is an RFP has gone out with the caveat the town meeting has not accepted it yet. So that it's only after the proposals come in and the town sees, you know, how much money it's making, what the tower looks like, that sort of thing, that then it would go to town meeting for town meeting to authorize the select board to enter a lease. Or, as I said, it can be done the other way, which is just to say, okay, this is a town site, we don't mind having a tower at, let's just give the select board the authority to make it available.
Mhm.
David, you were gonna say something about the two sites, Site 54 and Town Hall, and how they
Yeah, I
work
was just,
together.
yeah, thanks for getting us back on track. What I was just trying to look at is you know, what the locations are that provide sort of complementary coverage. And we did a couple of different approaches trying to get to where there's more, you know, density of development and activity. And quite frankly, the center of town is the elephant in the living room. That's you know, there's a tremendous amount of activity there and people and vehicular traffic, I'm sure. So the better that the center of town can be covered, the more that will take care of the problem that carriers are seeing in town. And then to the southeast, it's ultimately a question of what you know, what sites are available. And we did these hypotheticals on a number of town properties involving what did we do? The water treatment plant.
Did the pump station, do you want to take us? We're still on the
Yeah,
last,
and
we're still on the last
solar.
map, right? Yeah,
And Mountain View Cemetery.
yeah. Do you want to just start in and look at those in a?
And my question is sort of to what purpose? I mean, again, we're looking at these driving toward what in our discussions?
Well, exactly what he was just saying, the complementary aspect of how the coverage of utilizing these different town things bring about the possibility of
Okay.
that. So, I mean.
But in terms of our bylaw, it doesn't help us write our bylaw, does it?
Well, sure it
But
does,
it
because
helps
we
us
don't,
understand the
we don't,
sites.
yeah, right.
I think
In
the
town.
key issue, as far as I can tell graphically, and it's a little unfortunate, that these two maps don't really correlate very well in terms of graphics, but is the overlay between the 250 foot and the 500 foot and the hypothetical locations. And I think dwelling on any specific location runs the risk of creating panic. And I'm curious as to why in no case did you model any locations up on Lenox Mountain itself, as far as I can tell.
Simply wasn't on the list, so we didn't model it.
Because because
I thought there was one map that does have.
maybe I missed it, but there's nothing, as I see nothing west of the pump station.
So that's easy enough to do. The fire,
Yeah.
we, we had on one thing, the fire tower, the fire grade.
The tower, fire tower,
But-
something.
No,
It wasn't on my list.
No, but,
We can do that.
yeah, because topographically, there's an advantage there.
So we can add that to the list
Yeah,
for
maybe
next
that was
week.
just meant-
And it's not
And I-
just, I mean, the fire tower is one location, but I don't, there's a whole ridge there that
Mhm.
offers some advantage.
And I'm gonna say, I agree with Jim. I think that if we spend a lot of time on looking at these locations by name, like we just, as Tom said, we don't know that things are gonna happen there. It's more like, what are the lessons we're seeing from this mapping that can inform our bylaw writing in terms of,
Yeah.
the use table, the setbacks, the heights.
Because I would see it,
Isn't this exercise more for the, hypothetical list we provide to the select board as to, town-owned properties that they can make the ultimate decision?
But-
Is that what, that's how I
so
interpret it.
I thought what we're trying to do is create a set of rules that will survive an appeal in court because it's not prohibitively restrictive.
Mhm.
That's one way of looking at it. And the other way of looking at it is it will allow for some practical locations that respect distances from residential uses while serving the area that needs to be served. And so to me, the key issue is zeroing in on 10-foot, 50-foot, 100-foot, 500-foot, whatever it is. What does that leave us and how does that overlap with some sort of set of hypothetical locations that might work? And so I think actually, David, we might ask David to do is take a look at these 500, 250, and was the other one of 100 foot
100, yeah.
buffers? And they yield some green spaces and see what those locations in the green spaces yield for coverage in the town. Because if 500 foot does it,
Mhm.
then we've got a law that, a regulation that gives us good coverage, is going to survive an appeal in court, and is going to be appealing to a potential provider. We're done. And then if the selectmen want to go and say, well, the town-owned property that works with that selected buffer are these, and we're interested in leases here, that's their problem. That's not our problem.
right.
Mhm,
So I
right.
don't think we should delve into that at
So
all.
you don't think we should try to come up with a list at all?
Nope.
No,
Okay.
I think it's something on the list, though. I think it's definitely a good idea. And the thing, though, Jim, I want to say is if you start just by narrowing in on the green spaces, you don't know that those properties are even leasable. You don't know who owns them, et cetera.
But
So,
again, it's not our problem.
yes, it is, because
No, because
If
it's an
it's-
available property, and if a cell company came in and said, I'll offer you $1 million to lease that property, and someone owned it, they'd probably say yes. And if it's not worth it to them, then they
yeah,
won't do
but
it.
that would be an effective prohibition.
No,
So
it's
I'm
not.
somewhat concerned
No,
about
it's not.
that.
No, it's not, because we don't have control over the lease conditions.
Can I just comment on that? Really prescient thinking there, and a couple of thoughts come to mind. One is, if you're inclined to go with the setbacks for the reasons you've discussed, to use that approach rather than an overlay, which is another approach where you say the water treatment plant and the pump station and the this and the that are all locations where we will accept a cell tower up to X feet in height. If you're not prepared to do that at this point, and you're going to rely on those setback maps, it's a question of how many locations there are that not only look like they could provide tactically good coverage for particular parts of town, but that to address the concern that owner of parcel A and owner of parcel B in that green spot are not the least bit interested in having a cell tower, and is there a likelihood that parcel C in that same green spot might? So in other words, if you only have these little green areas, you're reducing the probability of success. But if you have larger green areas that cover more parcels and more points of access to a particular area that might be served, then you have a greater probability of success. And here in Medfield, we mapped the Medfield setback, and you need a magnifying glass to figure out where to put a tower to meet setbacks, and it's just not practical. So it's a trade-off. Having large enough green spots that meet the setbacks, that you have a good probability that there will be a property owner and a piece of property capable of being developed.
So,
So could I just hop in for a moment?
Yeah.
Okay, because it started with my talking about the maps. Because he was talking about this complementary kind of thing, and there were certain properties, certain areas done, I thought it would help us to sort of figure out how that occurred on these maps and take a look at it when we had David here as the map maker. That's all. I just felt when I was looking at it that, the blotches of blue and green and red, I wasn't necessarily, sure of exactly what those maps were showing. That was all. And,
right,
and I'm not talking about specific places, but just how that complementary aspect comes into play, because that seems to me to be the factor that no matter what combination of things we look at, we need that.
so,
It's not a one-side solution in town.
Just two observations I made making the buffer maps is that if you go up to 500, you really start losing opportunity in the village, and you also start limiting opportunity in Lenoxdale,
Right.
both of which are areas we know have really poor coverage,
Yeah.
and part of there are large reasons for why the town has gone down this path to
Right.
try to improve coverage. And I think you'll also start pushing the infrastructure. A lot of what's left is open space that is somehow protected for open space or recreation purposes. So that would lead you to another kind of policy decision too, I think, about whether or not you want to promote this kind of infrastructure in those scenic or ecologically special places.
Yeah, and the other thing is too, is that based on these maps, that really doesn't matter too much about, most of these are all around 100 feet or so.
Yeah.
That radius of good coverage,
Mhm.
it is about a half a mile.
Yeah.
So now with the 500-foot setbacks, you push it out of that. Now you got a cell tower that's out there, it's putting out great coverage where nobody is.
And what's striking is to look at the 500-foot buffer map, and then if you look at David's maps he did for Lenoxdale.
Yeah.
And those sites they modeled were all town-owned properties, so the solar farm,
Right.
wastewater treatment, Mountain View,
Yeah, Mountain View Cemetery doesn't,
even get you into
you're-
the village, not into the place where people in Lenoxdale are actually living. So you have to kind of head down to the
east of the tower, it's
to the
it's a waste.
wastewater
It's all up on
treatment
the mountain.
plant. But with the buffer, a residential setback, you'd really be limiting if you could even put a structure
Right.
at the wastewater treatment plant.
so
So
that,
I think there's a
The
helpful.
one that I thought was, the one that I found that was interesting was the one that shows Town Hall at 45 feet. It just shows the two towers, Town Hall and the one up at Lenoxville,
Okay.
at 9 Pittsfield Road.
Mm-hmm.
It's all the downtown's green, you get great coverage. But then there's nothing down the hill through Parsons Marsh.
Mhm.
But then you got yellow coverage all the way along Under Mountain Road.
but so,
You'd cover all the houses over,
Mhm.
everybody that lives on Under Mountain Road get not great, but they would get good coverage.
Can I also just mention, when you mentioned town hall and the setbacks situation, Gwen,
Mhm.
the setback applies only to towers. We're not talking about setbacks for attached structures that go on top of rooftops or in cupolas or things like that.
Correct.
Setbacks
Yeah.
relate to the new towers
Towers,
only.
Right.
Mhm. Yeah.
So, yeah,
because that's what we've decided.
well, because setbacks are, there to provide a fall zone,
Right,
a safety fall zone.
1.5
And
times the
to
height of the tower.
ensure, and we've actually got stuff in there now about not looming over residences. But when something is hidden from view in a structure, it's not looming over anybody and it's not falling over anybody.
So, I highlighted looming as a very vague term that's gonna get us into trouble. But I think, I guarantee you, somebody out there would tell you that the cell phone that's in the cupola that's broadcasting is looming over them and makes them feel uncomfortable. It's not a technical term, so it's gonna cause trouble. But I think the thing that's, I think that, the thing that is missing, so as soon as you pick a location or several locations, you're like creating special treatment. It's almost like spot zoning, but as long as we stick to buffers, the entire town is being treated the same way, and I think that's actually critically important. So, and I think what's missing here is a correlation between these hypothetical, first off, the hypothetical maps are about specific locations, which ultimately it may come down to specific locations, but we don't actually get to pick those. I think it would be much better to take these buffer maps and then use the zones that are revealed from that and just pick them, the center of that zone, for instance, hypothetically, and see what that yields for coverage for the town. And as soon as we have a buffer map that yields enough Swiss cheese holes that can give us a high likelihood of getting coverage, then the rest is actually, I think, beyond our control, because we're not the company that's offering to buy the lease, to pay for the lease, and we're not the property owner who is or isn't willing to take the lease, and we can never be those things. So I think that would be a much more favorable approach. And then, I guess there's a separate discussion about what the buffer should or shouldn't apply to, and whether that will or won't survive an appeal.
But I have a question. So by our bylaws, top preferences for town-owned property, correct?
It's on there. It's on the list now
Right.
qualitatively.
Yeah, we're
And
trying not to rank them, I think, in a way.
Yeah.
Because of the idea of
And mind you, I have benchmarking done, and I didn't bring it tonight. Use of municipal properties for towers is many municipalities go this route, because I think kind of for the reason that makes sense, it's already kind of a quasi-industrial space. It's away from residences and other people, so, and then town gets lease money. So
Right.
it's an effective model for making, again, meeting everybody's needs.
Right, so if we're sort of, we have, it's been duly noted in, let's say the Berkshire Regal and other sources that, there's a sense that this needs to move along, like that we need to get this in a flow, so to speak, so that we have interested parties in providing these services. Does it expedite matters to identify town-owned locations that provide acceptable service? I mean, I understand
But we-
from saying,
But we will be, because we'll have the map that shows this is the area that's outside the buffer and this is the area that provides good coverage.
right, but we don't, can we say, definitively that this area that provides good coverage is a town-owned
Well,
property?
then you just have to you take that and you look up parcels. and
I
you can
think
see who's
that's
there.
kind of, if going backwards to what you're saying, Jim, I think that I noticed in the GIS maps, and Gwen, if you can confirm this, that when you go from 100-foot buffer, which is the fall zone buffer, to the 250-foot buffer, which is the visually looming over kind of number, that the amount of green space that you lose is minimal, or it's just not notable, on this map.
There's still the general areas.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, once there's green area away from residences, there's a lot of green area away from residences. So if you picked one of these numbers or somewhere in between. And then don't worry about David doing more maps here, but you also looked at the town properties and to see if they fit that number, like you just said, I think.
Right.
Then you've got all you need to do is specify the setback and you're good to go. You don't have to have an overlay
Right.
or anything like that. You've said, we're gonna let anything happen, including on Lenox Mountain over here, anywhere here where it's green,
R3A.
and maybe we talk about the C zone. We talk about whether there are any zones in particular you just don't want 100-foot tower, period. And you're gonna really push your applicants to co-located on existing buildings or small wireless facilities. Those towers are only up to 50 feet. And then all you do is specify the setback. You don't have to worry about overlays. You don't have to worry about
Right.
anything else.
Well,
And likewise-
if you put that setback at 250 feet, that pretty much shuts out,
Areas that need to be covered.
like the R15,
Mhm.
the commercial district, and there's not enough room to put a tower in the commercial district here in Lenoxdale anyway.
Well, it shuts it out for locating the tower, but it doesn't necessarily shut it out for the coverage because we haven't looked at any locations up on the ridge,
Right,
which seem to be
right.
wood
But
survey.
my point that I was driving at earlier is all the mapping that David's done so far, that core radius of good coverage is only about a half a mile. Doesn't matter where the tower is.
It's right
you
here. You're gonna have good coverage on the mountain for your hikers. That's about it.
Well, I don't-
Nobody is.
No, but I think what he said,
Shadow across the
but-
valley.
I think what he said is it's dependent a bit on topography. So why don't we see what difference the topography makes that we haven't
But-
explored yet?
I thought he said it wasn't dependent on
No, he
topography.
says it's like down on the backside of the hill.
Oh, it
But
absolutely.
it only reaches so far blue and then it doesn't keep reaching blue if there's no, the blue does stop.
Well, the signal degrades.
The signal degrades after a certain amount of
At a
distance
certain
anyway.
Distance, but on the other hand, if it doesn't have any occlusions, it can,
The distance is greater.
yeah.
And
If
that's
it's going, he said if it's going over a field, it's better than if it's going through woods. Likewise, if
Yeah.
it's going above woods,
well, that's
it's
the
better
point
than
I
if it's
made.
going through
Yeah,
woods.
that's the point I made with the map that shows town hall.
So
Is that it goes, the coverage basically goes over the valley down the west side of town here. And you all of a sudden now it lights up the whole area over on Under Mountain Road.
So, in order to put a pin in this then,
Yeah.
am I hearing,
You're getting,
Which one I want, this one, I wish we had a number.
I know.
Yeah, it doesn't help.
It's the one that doesn't have, it's got the those
Town hall
90 Pittsfield and Town Hall.
Okay, yeah.
so what I'm hearing, I mean, I have like 10 questions about the
Well-
bylaw language, but what I'm hearing. Okay, go ahead.
No, I was just putting my hand
Oh.
down. I'm looking at a map. I have a question, but
I was gonna say, maybe if Gwen and David could work together to look at what setbacks we're talking about on these good candidate town locations. Do those fit into the, somewhere around 250-foot setback or, right in that area? And then can we map someplace on Lenox Mountain? Maybe Gwen, you can make a suggestion for David to just do a quick and dirty, like what happens if we have a tower up at the fire tower or
Well,
something like that.
we'd need several places along the ridge, and the fire tower is way out of sight at that.
Well, but we're not are we gonna get multiple towers?
who knows?
If the premise is that a cell phone company is gonna come in and put towers to create a network of coverage over the town, we have to accept that as the premise. And if the only way to do that is to put up multiple towers, then that's what you're talking
That's
about
what's
allowing to
possible.
happen. And the fire tower is not gonna help downtown, because the fire tower, you can't see from downtown.
Okay, well,
far away.
somewhere up there then.
There's a whole ridge to look at, but here's what I think. I think it's fine to say we encourage the town to consider locating these on town buildings. That's a planning goal. But I don't think it's necessary to pick out which one, because that'll emerge the ones that are viable based on setbacks and the ones that are desirable based on the companies. And if a company finds that this one's desirable and it works in the setbacks and they come to the town and they say, we want to do it, and our planning guide says that the town should consider doing it because it is income for us, the rest will take care of itself, and we don't have to sit here and argue about whether it's town hall or the pump station or the dump or lot 54 or whatever, that will all be part of somebody else's late night.
Right, but with the 250 foot setback, Jim, it does shut out some town.
But we're gonna examine 250 versus 100 versus 500 because the Swiss cheese emerges and it
But
doesn't.
I think we've gotta set a lower limit because most of the towers
Mhm.
per Dave's mapping, they're all around 100 feet. So you gotta go 1.5 times for your setback minimum.
The one behind, 90 Pittsfield Road is at 100 feet.
Well,
I
at
know
this
that's
point
taller.
though, Mr. Memo also had a
I don't know for
response
sure.
to that break point thing and said just to eliminate it, because if you add, my recollection, David, and I may be wrong here, but if you add other providers at a higher point,
That
it
is-
shoots the whole infrastructure.
Yeah,
you
that
know.
had something else to do with the specific design of the tower.
Yeah,
which we
but
don't wanna
basically
get
his
into.
whole thing was just don't even bother doing anything with breakpoint anymore.
Right, but that has nothing to do with the fall zone setback. That gets into specifics on how the tower is designed, which we don't wanna.
But
So
the
Tom-
falls up, even the falls up and stuff.
But
So Tom, are you talking about setting looking at a map or setting the limit at 1.5 times tower height?
That's kind of, I mean, Dave, what do you think? I mean, that's kind of been the rule of thumb that we've seen.
That is a rule of thumb, and that's a property line setback. That's, some people argue, well, towers don't jump when they fall over. But it is, as I think some of you have observed, that's to help reduce that visual impact to the immediate neighbors. So if you have an immediate neighbor with a relatively small property, you want to have that tower set well back, not only for fall zone purposes, but to increase the probability that the intervening trees will screen the view of it.
But again, I'm gonna come back to it. All that doesn't matter because all we're trying to do is come up with a framework that allows people to put in towers in a way that's gonna serve the town and is gonna keep us from getting taken to court. And if a company has a choice between picking this lot over here, even though we use 2 times the fall distance, or taking us to court, and that location works for them, they're gonna choose that location because they don't want to spend money on the lawyer. So I think if we can come up
Right.
with, I think we have the parameters here and it's totally clear that at 100, they can go a lot of places and at 500, it can go almost no place. So that the trick here is figuring out where between 100 and 500 seems to strike the right balance. And after that, we could be done.
With that part of it.
Well, right.
Yes, yes.
Well,
And let us go on to the other parts of it.
Can I add an observation just about coverage? What we've shown in our coverage maps is the lowest frequency, which gets through vegetation best and has the best coverage from the cell site. They have higher frequencies that don't go as far. So as some of you observed, if you have a tower in the middle of a forest on a hilltop and all of its really good coverage is reaching no one because it's just reaching the woods, that's not particularly effective today. It was 20 years ago because you're trying to get a modicum of service over a wide area. They're really going for capacity now, which means that when they put in the cell site, they want to be close to where the users are. They don't want to be a half a mile away in some cases, because they get the benefit of the overlay of their different frequency bands, all serving that same densely occupied area. And providing capacity, which addresses 2 things. One is the number of megabits per second each user gets when they're downloading a video, and also the number of users who are doing that at the same time. And that means bringing all of those frequencies to bear, and that means having the cell sites near where the density of activity occurs.
But won't your heat maps from the proposed tower locations make that clear graphically?
Yes, I think, but what it means is that some locations, they'll be looking to use, even if there is a, 250-foot setback, they may want to get a variance for that setback
Buffer.
because they're trying to reach the concentration of population where there's a whole bunch of small parcels and there is no ability to do the setback. And as long as you allow that for existing buildings, that may help. That it will encourage them to attach to rooftops rather than to try to put in towers in more densely developed neighborhoods.
So, right, and to piggyback onto that, if we do that through the setbacks, then that eliminates towers in, if you use the 250-foot, say, that eliminates it, in the C, it eliminates towers in the C district, in the R15, parts of the R1A or 3A. I can't remember what, I don't have the, where is it?
It's
We have
there.
it here.
It's right
It's over there.
Hang on.
Ta-da.
I mean, I also just think there's a reality here.
Yeah.
That we're hearing from residents, and we have always talked about this, that we want the best possible coverage with the least invasive infrastructure. What's the sweet spot? And if it's somewhere, from these maps, it looks to be somewhere around 250, maybe 200. It opens up, various bits of land. It keeps the town, the question is, I'm gonna guess it keeps most of the town parcels open for towers. Those are pretty big parcels. And there's not much difference between 100-foot and 250-foot in terms of what's left open. So why not put the bigger number out there, 250?
And the only part that's missing is the correlation between the cell phone heat maps
Right.
and the buffer zone.
And what the 250 does is because 1.5 times that, or 1.5 divided by that, it's 166 feet.
I mean, even at
Had to
100,
make a tower 150 feet tall, it would, in order to co-locate or whatever,
yeah.
the 250-foot setback still works.
I mean, with a tower, you get to have a setback, 1 to 1, no question, 1 to 1.5 times the height of the tower. That leaves us with, Gwen's first map. Gwen's first map is not that different. I mean, whether it works or not, that's what we
So are
have.
you talking about the 100?
Are you talking about the
foot
100 buffer?
Yeah, the 100 to 250, that's what works.
I still,
So it's not like you have to map it. That's all we have. That's all we got.
there's a semantic, it's not semantic, there's a philosophical difference between what you say we can do and what we can do and not get sued. So you're saying 1 to 1.5 times because that's some guideline that's been spelled to us.
It's a safety zone,
Yeah,
safety
right.
fall zone.
Great Barrington's using 500 feet, right? It's in their bylaw, right?
Yeah.
So they've used it. So we could do that. What's the pitfall with doing that? We could get taken to court and lose. And then we'll
end
be
up with-
back.
And end up with suboptimal coverage.
Okay. But that's the second part, which is the heat maps and where do they get located? Setting the buffer is what we're talking about. So 500 feet, fair enough. We wouldn't want to set 500 feet because it might preclude reasonable coverage. 250, let's just take that. 250. If we set that
That's the hot.
and it's longer than the, what would be like 175 because of the height of the tower, but we have 250. We're only going to get taken to court if a cell company can't find themselves a location that works with the 250.
I agree.
So I would go larger than what, I would err on the larger side, and I agree with you that 500 is gonna pretty much shut the town down.
What Great Barrington, just for clarity, what Great Barrington says is within 600 feet horizontally from any residential structure. They don't use property, they're using
Right.
structure.
Yeah.
1,000 feet from any school buildings, playgrounds, and athletic fields.
Right.
They have an overlay district also.
Yeah, can I make an observation on that there's a step between having a large setback and being taken to court, and that step is the applicant will come in and ask for a variance And they will attempt to demonstrate that they can't do it anywhere that meets the standard. And they will ask for variance. And if you don't give them the variance, then they take it to court. And what that does is that invites unintended consequences, because the variance process is a different kind of a review process than the special permit process. So you got to be careful about setting up a situation where you're inviting people to ask for variances.
I also think that we've got a philosophical question going into this, which is, to what degree do we want this bylaw? How do we manage the tension, I should say? How do we manage the tension between wanting to encourage infrastructure development so that we have cell phone coverage, not making it so bureaucratically hard, versus protecting, our view sheds, et cetera? Like, how do we resolve that tension in the bylaw? I mean, I think we're doing that as we go through this process, but that's philosophically, where do you go?
I mean, I thought, tonight we're looking at the buffer maps and we're looking at the heat maps. I'm sorry, I didn't know the terminology was used that way. And we're kind of getting caught up in something. And I thought that we had basically decided, based on some earlier advice that Mr. Maxim gave us, that having a set in stone setback, kind of disallowed a lot of alternatives when the ZBA was looking at things, that it took away a lot of the flexibility that you might otherwise have. And that's why we drove around and looked at kind of the Venn sort of thing, like a little bit more of this and a little less of that, and can find a spot that will be adequate, but it won't be, against a set in stone standard. That's kind of where I thought. Now it seems like we're talking a lot about, I thought we looked at the buffer just to give us an idea of what those setback, what 100 feet would mean, or 250 feet would mean, or whatever. But I didn't think that we were going in that direction. If nothing else, I'd like to see us having some kind of maybe expansion zones, 100 to, say, 100 to such and such a thing. But if you want the higher, then prove it. We talked about that somewhere in the bylaw.
But the prove it point is the variance,
Well,
right?
not so
Or
much- no,
waiver,
not
or
the- not the-
waiver.
Waiver.
You could make it a
He
waiver.
said you could do 100 or 120, but you have to make the case for 100, for the 20, for that extra 20 feet. There's some text in here somewhere that talks about that.
Right.
And so you're not really pushing somebody to do a variance, because you're giving them kind of a little bit of elasticity in the
So that
bylaw.
would be a waiver.
Yeah,
It's not-
but the setback now, remember, only applies to the freestanding towers.
Right.
It doesn't exclude you from,
And turn on.
pushing them towards, locating on a structure. So,
Does,
Right, right.
does anybody really think a tower belongs downtown?
of course not. No,
So it's all
first of
gonna be,
no room.
it's all, yeah, it's all gonna be co-located on a building
Right.
downtown. And probably better served if there's a lot of small ones than if there's any big ones.
I think most bylaws do have setbacks. They don't all have heights, like there's more variability on heights. And the stickler is from residential structures or properties. That's the stickler.
Right.
You could do something like picking the 250 number, since we can see it on paper here, and say that a waiver can be requested and put in a few performance criteria that would help guide the ZBA for those situations you're talking about, Kate.
If the tower it has to be higher.
Or, no, I'm talking about 250-foot setback.
Right.
That the, setback could be reduced to, as low as 1.5 or something. If the, following three things are demonstrated.
Yeah,
Yeah,
is that is not to some degree sort of incorporating what Jim was saying
Yeah.
about, putting in the top number or just,
But then saying if you come closer to what we look at as kind of a more perfect situation, then we can allow that. without a lot of extra fuss and bother,
Yeah,
without getting involved in, variances or
Yeah,
even waivers.
so we encourage and say, this is what we'd really like you to see.
So you come in and you make the case for where you want to put it in a very specific way, and that seemed to me that it was already in the text here somewhere, that we actually talked about that. And I think we need to, be firm that that's what we're really looking for.
Mhm.
So, I mean, should I come,
You know,
can I work with David and try to come back next week with language that puts this in writing, like 250, go down as far as 1.5 based on 3 criteria, something like that? Kate, does that make sense?
I don't know. I don't know that we want to be that specific, because what we want is for, again, at least this is my sort of sense, David, of where you've been trying to lead us, is that we want to really give the ZBA as much flexibility as possible. So, if we start saying, well, 20% of that, 30% of this, and whatever, the other part of the Venn diagram, we're starting to tie them up again.
Right.
Whereas, allowing them to listen to the applicant, make a specific case for a height within a range of heights that we give them, and, some sense that they really do need to, I have to be careful what I say here. I've sat in on ZBA meetings where, their criteria seems like a checkbox, rather than a real discussion about the criteria. And I'll let it go at that. Sometimes better, sometimes worse, depending on people's interests, but I think we really want the applicant to be responsive
Mhm.
to those parts of the Venn diagram. And it will be, in certain cases, it will be a little bit, higher here to take advantage of what you could do with another 20 feet on top of the tower, as opposed to, moving it another 50 feet in some other direction or something.
So I think that,
I don't know, it just seems like we're getting stuck.
I think that's easy to do on height, way easier to do on height. In fact, I recall one bylaw where it says basically just maximum height to provide,
Whatever.
best quality coverage. So it's left loosey-goosey. And make your case. It's the setback that's more controversial. Like if you don't have, I think if you don't have like a goal, like we'd love to see setbacks up to X number of feet, minimum. But
Yeah.
we'll accept a lesser number if blah, blah,
yeah,
blah.
you could say.
Otherwise, they'll
preference.
just come in with the lower number.
Right, preference, or I don't know, is it, you can't say by right, but it's, preference for setback of 250 feet.
Except that,
I mean, it's
again,
kind-
that's gonna have to be by zone, because we have zones that are pretty dense, still,
Yeah.
I
so
mean,
that-
again,
right,
it, this is.
But some
looking at
zones
these
aren't probably
areas.
good for a tower if they're that dense.
Right, and that, I think that's what we're talking, the two areas that we're talking about, are the Dale, and a huge portion of kind of southeast Lenox, and also the village.
Well, there's the East Street corridor as well.
Yeah, and the East Street corner.
We have people peppered all over the place.
Yeah.
Well, it's concentrated.
But, but if you look at it, there's not a homogeneity there. This isn't Levittown, where everything's exactly the same for
Right.
miles on end.
Uh-huh.
We've got lots of areas where the houses are more clustered, say on East Street, and areas where they're much farther apart.
So number 3 on page 5 of the draft bylaw, which is
Okay.
location preference, is a statement, I'm just gonna talk while you look.
Yeah, but just, give us the page.
Page 5 of the draft bylaw,
Yeah, the towers.
number 3, location preference.
Mhm.
This is really articulation of the Venn diagram, Kate.
Wait a minute, page 5 what?
Number 3. Number 3,
yeah,
new
okay.
towers locate, these are our preferences, new towers located as far from residential uses as possible so that their height does not visually loom over neighbors.
Mhm.
We got the loom over from our consultant.
Okay. All right, so,
So maybe we articulate that when we talk about setbacks, and that's what you start with. Like strong preference will be given to applicants who come in with proposals that blah, blah, blah. We encourage setbacks or prefer setbacks 250 foot, at minimum 250 feet, but we'll accept a waiver. We'll grant the ZBA
Yeah.
latitude for a waiver if they find, if the applicant can demonstrate blah, blah, blah.
But not to be less than, no less than such and so.
No
because-
less than
Because that's just the way it
1.5.
goes with that preference. So we were looking, where to put this tower, and it was our preference to put it 250 feet away, so it didn't loom, but we couldn't find any space that we preferred.
Well,
So-
that could be the case.
And, or on the zoning board, I'd really prefer that it was 250 feet away, but you're our only applicant. So preference is just it's like, it's a loophole. I mean, if you want it to be that flexible, it's super flexible.
The other thing that people have to demonstrate, so in preferences usually, yeah, they have to demonstrate why they couldn't meet the preferences.
Right, and that's written in here somewhere,
Mhm.
but it's very specific. I mean, one of the things that I did with this page, at least my understanding was not to even number them, just bullet them, because if we don't, as soon as
Oh.
people see number one next to something, they immediately think that's the most important.
Most important.
Yeah. So that if, and then, harden up in some way this section so that we make it really clear that when the review takes place, the interaction of all of these things are important to us. And it's not going to be just a check off, like, oh yeah, community character or whatever. In the paragraph below, kind of mid-page where it says location preference, and it talks about lower ranks and higher ranks, and I thought, what?
Which one?
Why are we saying lower and higher ranks? Because we're not doing that, are we?
Well, that was,
No, no, no.
David put this in here as a, it should have been in yellow. You're talking about where it starts
This-
number one in parens?
It's,
No,
Page
no, I'm
five.
talking about the entry paragraph.
location preference of co-locations, it's number,
It
It's
doesn't mean,
number-
it just says in order to, I mean, I think that means to achieve, not in order, comma.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, so what's your,
I'm talking about when you
The
use the word
prioritizing.
lower rank or higher rank or established hierarchy.
where's
that-
that? I don't know. What you-
That's in that paragraph.
Oh, that's a different, these are two sort of different things, and this is confusing.
Okay.
So
So-
when we had Anthony's version, he used to have a ranking like
Right,
this.
right.
David, after he saw our version, this draft version, he
So he sort of
put
commented
this,
on this draft
he
version?
put a few comments in here. There, most of them are in yellow. He put this here as kind of like another way to look at
Okay.
Oh, so that's.
preferences. And I think
Okay.
one of my questions is how do we marry these, if at all,
Yeah, I mean, if we're saying that all of these things are of value and not one of them has a greater or lesser value than any of the others, but it's some combination that will make for the optimum site, then we should try to avoid language like that,
I
that's
mean,
all.
the problem is you have to marry the effectiveness of coverage with the
Mhm.
aesthetic concerns.
Yeah.
And that's, it's very hard to sort of, but I mean, I think each applicant should be able to make a case essentially, that their proposed tower or whatever would in fact provide effective coverage and yet not be obtrusive in an obnoxious kind of way. I think that should be the expectation placed on the applicant, and so that's kind of why I like this top rather than the ranked kind of things there, because I think it allows for more of that idea of, what we're trying to accomplish here. Least offensive structure, with greatest coverage wins the beauty pageant, something like that. It just,
Yeah, I mean, and Jim is correct, so much of this is subjective, but on the other hand, I think there is a body of kind of a consensus around certain elements, like, no, I don't want the tower right there.
right.
I might not want it 50 feet away. Somebody else might be like, okay. It doesn't bother me at all. Other people
Mhm.
don't want it within their visual landscape at all.
Mhm.
And it would be hard to provide any coverage in the town if that were the case.
Mhm.
So somebody's going to see it somewhere.
Mhm.
Okay, so I'm hearing about putting down a bogey, I don't know if that's the right word. Hardening up this height within a range of heights, language. And setback being,
Maybe hardening up.
setbacks being what I said before. About, residential, far away from residential. 250, maybe make it more firm, but then provide the wiggle room based on, maybe as firm as we can get, performance standards to grant a waiver. Like you must demonstrate that there's nowhere else you can achieve the
Mhm.
250
Yeah,
feet.
and I mean, that language does show it up in here.
Yeah, it's in
you know,
there.
But it's sort of hard to read a lot, a lot of this. Um,
Height, setback. What about, do you want to talk about the use table?
Not yet.
Oh, okay, what do you want to do, Tom?
So I have a question on, page 3.
Okay, so you're
So-
next to it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so this administrative approval.
Oh,
and then
yeah.
Dave had a comment about still want this to be special permit process. So can you just explain that, your thinking on that a little bit, Dave?
Yeah, remind me what AA is?
Administrative approval.
Okay,
So, and it-
all right.
And AA was gonna be just for eligible facilities requests and non-substantial changes, which might be the same thing.
There is, yes, it is. There, see, eligible facilities requests is a term defined by the FCC. It still leaves some control to the municipality. It is not a strict preemption. But it just says that if it is an eligible facilities request, you may not deny and you shall approve the request. But that doesn't mean you can't hear it. So you hear the request and you say, yeah, this is great. It meets the FCC's dimensional requirements and this and that, but we think you should do this to make it look better. Or, whatever it is that you think you have some control over it, the FCC has not preempted. So that in that case, it comes in as a special permit request or request to modify an existing special permit. And you would treat it with the same process, just knowing that you have a different time frame to do it in because the FCC shot clock is shorter for these. But
So I think that what we've talked about this before, and I actually took administrative approval from your last version, David. The thing is if you call it a special permit, the special permit has its own legal requirements as per Massachusetts law
yeah,
about
absolutely.
timing and notification. And we felt like because of the expedited process that you have to go through when you have an eligible facilities request, that you need to call it something else and make a little set of rules on what that other process is how it's gonna be managed. This board in its original discussions felt originally like we wanted to make it like it was a special permit, but it's not called a special permit.
What was that, basic use permit?
It was a
which-
base use
Right.
permit.
But I think you still benefit from relying on the rubric of Massachusetts state law. That
So what's the time?
that it's still a special permit process, and you have that to defend your activity in reviewing this permit application.
So remind us what the time frame for an eligible facility request approval is?
Yeah, I've had them all memorized. So yeah, I'm not recalling. It's probably either 60 or 90 days.
We could make it, right, Gwen? So let's
Yeah.
just check that, and I don't know, you want to make it as a special permit or modification of a special permit?
I think so. Yeah, I agree with what Dave is saying, is that, you still want to be able to have some kind of review. It's not
But-
just a rubber
But we
stamp.
can't call it a special permit because we can't deny it.
Yeah, that's what I thought
Okay, so
Anthony
we
had
have to
said.
have a different set, we have to have a different descriptor for it, so is that how it became the administrative?
I think that's
whatever.
what Anthony told us, like you can't call it a special permit because then it's not
Technically a special.
right legally. That's why we call it administrative approval, but the whole
Yeah.
process was gonna be like a special permit.
Right, it was
Is
going to
it-
have
is
some
it
of the
like,
same functional aspects,
Yes.
it would have a hearing, it would notify abutters, et cetera.
Is it site plan? review?
But-
Yeah, that's.
Yeah,
sounds
kinda like that.
Site plan review.
That's some-
Okay, so can we call it, and we do apply site plan review through the ZBA.
Right.
So we
Yes.
should call it a site plan review, if that works then?
Yeah,
I mean, David, you're sort of looking like thoughtfully anyway. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, I guess my concern is that the property exists as a permitted property. And
Because it already exists, is that?
yes, an
That's-
eligible facilities request is to modify an existing permitted property in one of two ways. One way is an existing carrier is changing out their construction and they're making some modifications that are not substantial by the FCC's definition. The other one is a new carrier is coming in and is making a modification to a site that a previous carrier occupies, and the previous carrier has a special permit. And so my question is for the attorney is, what about that is not a special permit or a special permit modification? Even though you're required to do it by the federal government.
So it's not, an eligible facilities request is not for a new tower.
No, it's simply to modify an existing facility. Yeah. Yeah.
Gotcha.
And mind you, let me also say that that section of the bylaw is the one section that the stuff got transposed. I have to admit, I wasn't paying that close attention because it was all like gobbledy technical language. So I'll clean that up
This-
next
this
version.
gets very confusing.
That part got
Yeah, yeah.
confusing.
Because I ended up going back to an old thing saying, why does that sound like this basic use to me?
It is, we
Yeah,
changed the
right.
word because he
Right.
didn't like basic
Right,
use,
right.
so
But
we changed
again, I
it.
had to go back and then reread what he had written around that.
I
Yeah,
think, I have a vague recollection of Anthony saying something like, because it's like cannot approve, cannot deny,
We
must
can't do
approve,
deny.
it's not a special permit.
Right.
Special permit has latitude because it's a special thing.
I mean, it's interesting, in Mr. Maxon's notes, it says, you still have the right to verify the application for, eligible facilities is bona fide. And, I mean, I'm not exactly sure how we would go about determining that, whether it was bona fide or not, but what if it's not bona fide, then we are denying it, right?
So what if we
Well,
just call it something
because-
like eligible facility
No, no, no,
request
because they're gonna
permit
go
and
back
call
to
it,
the old permits.
it's the only thing, why don't we just call it something like it's the only thing that's AA so far. Unless we made substantial changes and upgrades more than 10% taller than original, but that can be a special permit. If it's only for EFRs, why don't we just call it EFR reviews? And just call it EFRR, and just call it that, because it's the only thing that needs it. And
So
say it's gonna operate similar to the special permit process or whatever.
ER and AFR?
Review,
So you want to call it the AFR review?
No, it's eligible.
No,
Isn't it?
eligible
eligible
facilities
facility
request
request review.
Yeah, EFR.
Are
Um,
Oh, request.
I mean, I just called it
What?
administrative approval before,
Yeah,
but
I guess why can't we call it site plan review?
Why can't we
Because
call
it
it site plan?
does
Yeah.
really,
we have to define site plan review.
well,
Jim raising.
I agree with Pam, EFR review process.
I could go either way. I don't care.
yeah, we have a pretty robust site plan review in the zoning bylaw already.
Right.
And again, like you can't deny a site plan approval. It's just you can put conditions on it.
correct.
Mhm.
yeah, I mean.
Maybe
And I
they-
think that gets recorded with it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's not statute for it like there is special permits. But the way we treat it now is applicants come and pick up their site plan approval decision and they record it.
There's
The
probably an
registry.
eligible facility crest, because this is all in federal law,
Alright.
says they have to submit certain things.
I'm
And
just
maybe
thinking
only have
too,
to submit certain things.
because special permits run with the land unless they're made personal to the, like the user or the operator, so. Yeah, I don't know, I think you could make it site plan approval, and then not have to.
Kind of create a new name for,
Yeah,
unless we be stuck with our,
oh, but
site
in our
plan
site plan
criteria.
approval, or review, people are allowed to ask for a waiver. from the whole process.
Yeah,
Oh.
it's like a whole different thing.
Yeah, they can come to the zoning board at like a regular meeting without the same level of notice as you would get for a special permit or the public hearing, and ask that the board waive the entire,
Oh.
waive it.
Hmm.
Which is good because it sounds like some of this, like what David's describing, it's going to be like, oh, so Verizon built the tower some time ago, but now AT&T is going to use it. And as long as like the height, like, it doesn't sound like a lot of is going to change in an eligible facilities request.
The
So
height
our
could change by up to 20 feet, and the breadth of, if it's a tower, the breadth of the tower could change by up to 20 feet, which is mind-boggling. But so it's right. It's those are the dimensional aspects of an eligible facilities request. There are some other characteristics as well that have to do with new excavation and some other things that the FCC defines. So from my perspective, there's a special permit on that site already, and this is modifying that special permit. And we have a catch-22 because council is saying you have to approve it, therefore it's not a special permit. And I think perhaps council and I can have a conversation to figure out if we come up with a.
I don't know who our council is at this point. So can I ask you a quick question, just since we're on eligible facility requests? Do we, let's maybe get it baked a little, do we have to put in the descriptive language of what a substantial change and an eligible facility request is into our bylaw, or are those federal definitions? And if we get one, Gwen and team will sort it out with you or whomever. Does it have to be in the bylaw?
It doesn't have to be in the bylaw. I've seen it done both ways. What I'm seeing more recently is that because of the complexity of the federal stuff, that your average special permit granting authority board member is not going to be looking up all of these different technical terms and the shot clocks and all that. So that if it's available in the bylaw, it adds pages to the bylaw. If it's available in the bylaw, it's all right there front and center, and there's no ambiguity.
I mean, we took out the shot clock because it was wrong, and it's my understanding there are 4 different shot clocks, something like that.
Yes.
So I don't know. It's like,
it would be more shot clocks.
Yeah. I don't think I should put it in.
no, just leave out the definitions, because I think we have a town planner. If something comes in, Gwen is gonna make sure the zoning board.
Gwen's gonna be really up with all the FCC regulations
Gwen,
as
no.
they're amended, as it always
Wouldn't
is.
you? I mean, you'd help the ZBA understand.
But we
Yeah,
can
she's
get a
nodding.
consultant, correct? We
Yeah.
can call in a consultant.
Yes.
So that would be our escape valve. I mean, that would be the only way in which I'd feel, David's basically saying some put it in. That seems to be the tendency now because everything's so complex. But on the other hand, if we feel that the ZBA will utilize someone to give them the expertise, and that will take the pressure off of both the ZBA and our town planner director, I think that's useful. We could go without it.
I looked at 11 bylaws. I didn't see it I don't recall seeing
Well,
it.
it's because bylaws, you have to be looking at 11 bylaws that were made within the past 18 months.
Yeah,
I mean, that's a biased. You're looking at bylaws that haven't been updated, and we do have towns that are doing that. Now, I think it's a good point. You get all that chaff out of the bylaw, and you put it in a guide that sits in a binder in the planning department. So it's all explained. It's just not something that you have to adopt in the bylaw.
Okay, so before we start down that rabbit hole, we've been at this an hour and a half now, so I said we'd open it up to the crowd for questions, concerns related to the bylaw discussion. So who wants to go first? Go ahead, just
Do
identify,
you want this in writing?
when you're gonna speak, just identify yourself.
No, we only were suggesting in writing if we couldn't get to all the questions.
And their,
Okay,
and their
yeah.
address where they live.
As we head into the future, because we're really, as you can see,
Okay, I'm
Spending
Ellen
quality time
Jacobson.
on this.
I live at number 6, the Curtis across the street. So my first question is, where is parcel 54? Is the Curtis building in it? It
No,
sounds like it.
parcel
So
54
my
on
side
this,
of the bypass.
so parcel 54 on these maps is the sawmill site.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I'm
where
very
the-
familiar with
Yeah,
that site.
Where the
Yes.
public safety building
All right,
is.
thank you.
Is that across from
Essentially.
Caligary's?
Correct.
Because I heard mention of Housatonic Street and all, which I know goes down there. So that was not being discussed this evening. Correct. Thank you, because I'm gonna be asked that one. The other one is about individual property owners. Speaking to what Jim said, does an individual property owner have the right to lease his or her location to providers such as AT&T or Verizon? If they
Yes,
own the property?
if it's permitted, then yes.
Yes.
That's
And
correct.
would they then have to come to either the zoning board or the planning board to say, this is what we are thinking of doing
Yeah, the
and get it
property,
approved?
the property owner would not, I don't believe, the carrier would have to come before the ZBA.
The who, please?
The
Carrier.
infrastructure
The
provider,
The
infrastructure.
project.
whoever's
the-
building it.
The project would have to come before, whether it's
Okay,
done by the,
and this is what is being proposed.
Right.
But in that case, the individual would be a property owner, not the town.
Yes.
correct.
Correct.
Okay,
In theory, even if the town was the property owner, it still
yeah.
needs to be permitted.
And you also mentioned site plan approval conditions. We would make a bylaw and then we would have people who are making proposals to prove something like 1, 2, 3 conditions. Okay, is one of those conditions the health of the people within the realm of the signals?
I can answer that.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Yeah, the condition is, health is covered, but it's covered by the federal standards. And that's as far as the town can go in regulating the facility. As long as it meets the public safety, the public health standards adopted by the FCC, it's covered.
Okay, I understand. And I'm not that familiar with the FCC, but I can get there. The point being, that's not something that the town can make judgments about.
Correct.
It's already done.
Yeah.
So look at that, and if there's a challenge to be made, that's where it should go,
Correct,
correct?
correct.
Basically, thank you.
I'm not a lawyer and I don't play one on TV.
Talk about not being one.
Tom, I'm just noticing, I guess since I had David facing the group, there were a number of chats that came in via
Okay.
Teams.
Oh, I didn't see them.
Well, some of them are pertinent to the discussion and some are really, I think, more specific to things that have happened or are cited in Pittsfield. I guess the question I'm seeing, and everyone can chime in after the in-person folks have, was just if people could clarify where the sawmill site is.
So
Yeah.
across from Caligari.
And that was parcel 54.
Across
Or
from
like
Caligary's.
Yeah.
people asked what parcel 54
on the
was.
east side of the bypass, on the east side of the bypass.
Yes.
Yeah, and so
It's-
that's
It's the
for
one that they
everyone.
wanted to build the low,
Kind of
housing.
affordable.
It's on the
And they
corner
got
of
lost because you get
Housatonic
two-thirds
Street
majority.
and Route 7, across from Caligary's. It's town-owned property. One woman asked if the board has ever considered a 1,640 foot setback.
It's a quarter mile, I think.
And if, the board or if the town will be considering health impacts.
So we just answered that as well.
Yeah, and I think that sounded like it was covered.
Mhm.
And I would say too, for people who have been sending the chats, we're not monitoring the chat box for this meeting. So it's better just when it's time for comments or questions, if you could just speak them.
Chime in and
Went
ask.
during
Yeah.
that period.
Use your voices.
Okay, so who else here? Go ahead.
Well,
Just identify yourself. for
Phil
the record.
Gilardi, Pine Knoll Road in Lenox. I guess you have maps and you've done where you're gonna, where the obvious places to put them are, but it was said that the cell tower company can put them where they wanna put them based on.
Well, they'll determine what works best for them.
Yeah,
It doesn't necessarily mean it's gonna be allowed in that place.
No, but I mean,
Right.
it just says that if the guy wants to put one within X number of feet of my lot, he can, or
Well,
he may
again,
decide to, because that may be a good location.
he may apply for it and it may
Right.
not be allowed based on what
It has to
was,
conform.
right, has to conform to what the bylaw is gonna say.
Yeah, well, God bless you guys to come up with a bylaw, because, I mean, you gotta explain this to 2/3 of the town residents, and I can't see where anybody can explain this thing all.
Difficult,
Yeah,
a
yeah.
lot to it.
I appreciate that comment.
Although I will say that you're watching us really, we kind of in our discussions make things complicated so we understand them because we're kind of drilling down. When we're done, it's gonna hopefully be much easier to explain because we will have had these really complicated conversations about how to
Well,
make an answer.
I'm waiting for that book that the planner's gonna have, that's gonna answer your questions. Now, when is that gonna be developed? Okay, now-
700 pages. and
Yeah,
it's-
700, 800 pages. I'm waiting for that to be developed.
Yeah.
Well, whatever bylaw that you guys come up with be reviewed by an independent lawyer.
And we have a lawyer, right? And
It'll be-
KP Law is our town council.
Well, I know, but I mean, he may not be up to speed on microwave transmission. And, you know, Pittsfield is being sued and has been sued by microwave towers off of Plum Street and off of Holmes Road.
Mhm.
So, I mean, it looks like it's a very complicated issue, and you guys, I gotta bless you guys for trying it. But I think it's gonna be very difficult to support it to 2/3 of the population, especially when you say, hey, it could be Calgary's, but the low housing, you know, when people say it could be there, you're gonna get pushback from that neighborhood. Or it's gonna
Maybe,
get
maybe
pushed.
not.
Well, you will get pushback from that neighborhood. Like when you tried to go across to the Curtis over here, you got pushback. Okay?
We didn't try to do,
They didn't.
Interestingly, at one of the meetings
Huh?
in the past, in some of the discussion, someone spoke for the neighbors and said that, you know, they would be interested in the public safety building being on that site, and that does imply a communications tower
Right.
for public safety, so, you know, but again, that was one person in that particular neighborhood basically saying, you know, we would support that more than affordable housing.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was proposed and it isn't there, but the other thing I have is if you have a tower, you could have, I heard you could have maybe 4 or 5 carriers on a single tower.
Right.
Now, these carriers can provide 100 watts of power to the transmitters. So if you have 5 transmitters, is that 500 watts being transmitted?
That's a good question for Dave.
David, can you answer that?
Yes, the numbers aren't necessarily correct, but the concept is yes. If you have 3 carriers on a tower, you're going to have 3 times as much signal propagating to and from the antennas on that tower. And the combination of those facilities still has to meet the federal standard. It's not that each individual facility on its own has to meet the standard. It's the sum of all of the radio signals together has to meet the federal safety standard.
Okay, but the federal safety, it was said that the FCC doesn't allow you to consider health benefits or health. It's not the prerogative of any local committee to consider health. Now, I think I've seen a presentation from University of New Hampshire peer review that said that if you have a cell tower and it's radiating power, if you're farther than 1,600 feet from it, your chances of getting a disease are normal. If you're within the 1,600 feet, you could have 4 times the probability of problems. And that's dependent, some people are sensitive, their hearing is better at low frequency, high frequency, but people are all different. Biologically, that study, which was done by the University of New Hampshire, peer review, independent, said 1,600 feet is what New Hampshire is proposing. Now, your setbacks seem to be only concerned about having the tower fall over. And you're not even, but you don't consider the biological functions. And I think that's gonna be a question people are gonna ask.
Very simply, we can't consider that.
Yeah, but
Right, Dave? Those are the kinds of things that our hands are kind of tied on.
That's right. The FCC standards are based on systematic review of all of the scientific literature by expert public health entities, agencies. They are not what we see when we search the internet, opinions based on cherry-picked science. You really have to rely on the FCC standard. Personally, I've been dealing with the FCC standard for 40 years, and I think it's a very safe standard.
well, FCC standard was designed in 1992, and I believe it was radiation and can cause a 1 degree Fahrenheit rise in body temperature, and it's somewhat outdated. And then I thought that the Washington DC judicial system asked the FCC to review health safety and review peer reviews, and that a lot of people that are considering bylaws have said, let's wait until FCC finishes the safety study and put it on moratorium until that study is done.
I think what was kicked back, what the court kicked back was further study of the effects on children under a certain age.
The children we've had a lot of children here. I don't know how many
Yeah.
you've had.
This,
Right.
I'm sorry to interject here, but this is the slippery slope that we go down when in a public hearing, we start discussing the merits of the science. None of us, not even myself, is an expert on the science. I know experts on the science, and I know what they do to make sure the standards are maintained and kept up to date. And the FCC standards are the rule. You may not like them, but it is what it is, and we have to live with it.
Things change. I mean,
Okay,
we were smoking,
Excuse me,
we were
sir.
smoking 20 years ago, but everybody said it was safe, but it ain't safe.
Okay, we've got to move on to some other folks'
Question
questions.
from the chat, somebody had asked about, what about small cell?
What about it?
What about it?
She just had said, what about small cell?
We
I
have
can
it.
speak.
Small cells are in this bylaw. A small wireless facility is a wireless facility, so they are included within this bylaw. And we have it in our use table for discussion as to whether or not we want to, promote those in particular, or limit certain zones only to small cells
Right.
for discussion.
Right.
But they are in this bylaw.
Right. David, did you have a comment?
No, I was just going to say basically that small cells are an important part of both wireless networks and local bylaws these days. So that's new stuff that's going to be in the bylaw.
And Franny's back.
Susan May, 40 Old Stockbridge Road, which is Turner Terrace. And first of all, I want to appreciate the thorough job that all of you folks are doing. And I know this has been going on for a long time. So, and there is a lot to it, obviously. My problem is that I think that this is being rushed at the end, and it has not been presented to the townspeople. I'm afraid if we go to town meeting on November 17th 2 or 3 people might get up to speak. And then somebody, because it's gonna be at the end of the night, will say, I called the question, and there we are.
Yeah.
Without people having an understanding of what you folks have been working on for how long, 2 years? I don't know how long it's been. And all the intricacies of setbacks and height restrictions and everything else. It's very complicated stuff. And this is being rushed. Why? Because for the tourists who come next summer?
Well,
Is-
all right, let's stop it right there.
Okay.
All right, let's
Okay.
not go down that road. So
Yeah,
first of
okay.
all, this is not being rushed. We are trying to, I'll have you removed if you keep that kind of stuff
Yeah,
up.
okay, I'm
So
sorry.
let's just keep it civil,
I'm
all
sorry.
right? So what I said last meeting was, we would agree to meet the next 3 Tuesdays and see where we are. No promises. We were asked to try to get this ready for the November town meeting because it's, the bones of this is basically all done. We have to settle on where they're gonna be allowed in town, the maximum heights and the maximum setbacks. Those are really only the 3 issues that are left with this. So if we can get that done, and we still have to have a public hearing after we're done with all our stuff. We still have to have a public hearing before it goes to town meeting. There may simply not be enough time.
Yeah, so when is this public hearing
Well,
scheduled?
we don't know yet because we have to have this all done first. If we have this all, hypothetically, if we get this done next Tuesday, we'll have the public hearing. We can't have it the following Tuesday.
The
don't
public
think.
hearing has to be advertised 2 times in
Yes.
2
Right.
consecutive weeks,
Right.
and
To
you
be
can have
legal.
it. Yeah, we know what we're doing.
Yeah.
So, it can be even the day before special town meeting.
Right.
And so it sounds
But
like
that's
the,
not fair.
the warrant would be posted probably on November 2nd.
Right.
And that's around the time we were thinking you could have the hearing. I was on November 15th.
Right.
November 15th?
Which would be the Tuesday
there's no
before
guarantee
the
that's when it's gonna
Thursday
be.
special town meeting.
Excuse me, but it's hard enough to get people to come to a town meeting. We don't have a history of a lot of people showing up. Then we go to a special town meeting and there's less folks showing up. Then we have the week of the second town meeting, we have another town meeting to explain these new bylaws. People are gonna come out twice in the evening in 1 week. Wants to hear the new bylaws and then 2 days later to vote on them. I just don't think that's fair to the town. I really,
I think we share those concerns. Believe me. And we're very, as Tom said, no promises. We said we would, because this has been going around, we've been going around and, we know pretty much what we need to do. They're very difficult questions because once we do decide on them, they're hard decisions to make.
Yeah.
So I think, we totally understand what you're saying. This is hard enough for us to follow, hard enough for the people who've been coming steadily to meetings to follow and who've been following this in ways in other towns. And we're going to be pushing the rest of the public towards a vote. We're pretty cognizant of the problems with that. But we are gonna try to see what we can get done. And if we feel comfortable that we can go to town meeting with this, we'll go.
That's it.
Is that,
but.
I mean,
okay,
Susan, at a certain point, there are a few key decisions to be made. There's a framework for the bylaw. That's like a lot of legal jargon and stuff like that. And there are kind of 3 decisions that are the meat and potatoes. Or excuse me, can I finish? That are the entree. We're so close that we felt like it's only gonna take, it may only take a few more meetings to make the final decisions that have been circling around us, and we have been circling around for 2 years. Let's go ahead and have the meetings and make some decisions. Sometimes it's just time to finish rather than prolong it for me, forever. We don't want to prolong it another year.
Mhm.
Sometimes you just need to have a couple of meetings and get it done.
I understand that you folks are ready to finish it up. And I understand there's not a lot left to do. What I'm questioning is there a time for the townspeople to understand, the people who must vote on it at special town meeting, is there sufficient time to explain it all to them, for them to make an intelligent decision in their vote?
My experience, this is just vague, this is general experience of like 7 years on this board, is that coming up to town meeting, a few weeks prior is when people really do pay attention to what is on the warrant. And then they're like, okay, I gotta vote soon. Now I'm gonna really pay attention and dig into this. So we'll be ready for that. That's just my 2 cents.
All right, we
Okay.
got,
Well, the only reason that they dig into the warrants is because they don't get published
So-
more than a couple of weeks
So they're
before the
accustomed to
meeting.
that. They're
Yeah.
accustomed to that. Citizens are accustomed to that.
So,
so Franny, you've been waiting
Yes,
patiently.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'm Francie Sorrentino. I'm a member of the parish of St. Vincent de Paul Church in Lenoxdale. I am a native of Lenoxdale. Rushed? It's more than rushed, it's an urgency. We have no reception in Lenoxdale. I had a medical facility trying to get in touch with me because of an ill family member, unfortunately, didn't work. And no, sir, it took me until I got to Kemple Street. They had one bar. So I turned around and I went the other way and got over the top of the Dale Bridge. And finally I got reception. Something needs to be done. We know that. It's a law that it has to be done. I elect you people because I take my right to vote very seriously. I have faith in each of you. And I have no doubt that you're gonna make the right decision. Gwen, you have received correspondence from our pastor, Monsignor John Bonzani.
Yes.
He too is a lawyer. Do you have any questions about our proposal for Lenoxdale? Make it known and get the answers that you need. And I appreciate you taking us into consideration. It would really mean a lot to be noticed that the urgency is there. We're more than PCBs. We're more than a noisy train. We need it to happen. And, people need to be reached. And I need to be able to call out, and I'm not. And it's gotten worse.
Mhm.
You need notice? Been working on this since Gwen came on board. I approached her. And now you've buried into it for 2 years? Let's go. So thank you for your time. I really do appreciate that. And I thank you for taking into consideration. Because you guys are getting beat up and I know what that's like being on town boards.
Me too.
So I salute you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Franny.
Something to Fran. One thing I think that has happened and just in the past 2 years is a lot of people have given up their landlines. And
That's what happens. I have a landline,
Yeah,
but I'm sorry, Spectrum rats.
yeah.
Okay. Okay? 'Cause, it
So-
takes 3-minute delay
Yeah,
to even make the call connect.
yeah, my point is
Yeah,
that,
that's
many have given up their landlines, which makes them more dependent on cell phones and especially for, emergency kinds of situations. So, I mean, I don't think anybody wants to see an area of the town without service.
Right.
I mean, I think everybody is united on
And I
wanting,
understand that.
yeah.
Right.
So,
But
but,
when you have a 100-year-old laying on the ground confused,
no, I know.
something needs to be done quicker
Yeah,
than mailing out notices.
I don't disagree.
I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Franny.
Thanks, Franny.
So
Yes.
my name's Veronica Cunningham and I live across the street at the Curtis. And as you were talking about coverage when I first arrived, and I do apologize for being late, is the idea that there are going to be enough cell towers so that they overlap enough so that there's coverage all over the town? Consistent coverage all over the
I think
town?
it's that.
Or would it be spotty because they don't overlap? You know, that diagram that they show you about circles and where the circles meet. I'm thinking about that, the radius of all the towers. They will be overlapping, won't they?
Not necessarily.
Not
And
necessarily.
it depends, and again, like I said, towards the beginning, you might not have been here when I said it, these maps that we've been looking at are purely hypothetical. We picked out some town-owned sites and, that could be favorable for coverage. Whether or not a carrier is gonna say, yeah, that works for me, is a whole different story. So we're looking at this, trying to figure out where the gaps in coverage, well, we know where the gaps in coverage are, but where it might make sense to put towers or other infrastructure to get that coverage. We're kind of shooting in the dark. We've got the help of Mr. Maxon, the consultant, who's an expert in the field, to help us along the way. But at the end of the day, when a carrier comes in and makes a proposal, we don't know where they, but we'll have the bylaw, that framework in place to guide them where we want towers, where we don't want towers,
Okay,
that
thank
kind
you.
of thing.
But we're also not totally dependent on towers.
Correct.
There are other aspects of this, that's small wireless. So, it's not like we're waiting that, we're going to have this whole slew of towers that overlap and that will take care of everything. And there'll be towers everywhere. That's not really the plan at all. But it's, what minimum number of towers will give us something to stand on. What carriers will also be on them, what numbers of carriers to give, a little bit more capacity to everybody. And then what these other kind of infill things can do for us. So,
Smaller structures or things on telephone poles, that kind of thing.
Yes.
Well, anyway, I
Well-
appreciate all the work you've been
Thank you.
putting in.
what did you say your last name was?
Head home.
Okay.
Okay.
But there's two people who have their hands raised on Teams, so Deanna will.
Deanna, thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
All right, take care, Gwen, thank you.
Go ahead.
Chris, hi.
I am Chris Chalfie. I am an interested party. Hey, David. Hope you're
Go.
well.
Mr. Chalfie, nice to hear you.
How are you?
Where do you live,
Where
Chris?
do you live? I live in Pittsfield, but we also have a studio on Church Street. I've known David for probably 30 years, and I've built one or two facilities over that time. I built the Lenox Fit site 20 plus years ago.
Can we
I
have
commit-
the conversation in the background stop, please? Thank
Well,
you.
yeah.
I could speak loud, but I'm trying.
That would help. Thank you.
Can you close
So
the door?
I just had a few comments. I mean, I'm an interested party. I am working with several of the carriers that are interested in coming back to Lenox, and we're looking at a few different properties in Lenox right now. You had mentioned about adding some of the town properties to the list for the selectmen. And one of the members kind of shut that idea down. I think that is a very good idea to add that in to give you some flexibility, but also time to market. There was discussion tonight about not getting the town sued and making this a legally compliant bylaw. And David will do a great job in making sure that it's legally compliant. But in my view, you also have to try to attract the carriers and make it attractive for the carriers to come to town, rather than take their money and bring it to Springfield or Somerville or somewhere else, because Lenox is too difficult to work in. So I think, and listening to you tonight, you're trying to walk that line, and it's a fine line to walk. But I think one way to do that is if you can shave some time off, rather than having a carrier or a tower builder like myself come to you and say, okay, now that you have this bylaw in place, we'd like to lease this property. Now it has to go to the selectmen, it has to go back to a town meeting, you've lost another year, and that whole process continues. So I think that's a good idea. Whether anyone's interested in a town property or not, you don't know, but it can't hurt to have them on there. There was some discussion about what Great Barrington did. And unfortunately, Great Barrington did what Lenox did previously and kind of cherry picked some properties. And, that was an old thing to try to be compliant with a bylaw, not consulting with someone like David with his expertise or the carriers and saying, where should we have these zones and make us, and I just built the tower behind Mount Greylock High School in Williamstown. It's a special permit process. We had to go through a special permit. They didn't pick which properties we could go on. And I'm glad to see that the town's not going back to that thinking of, okay, we're only gonna have town properties or we're only gonna have them in this zone. Two other things that I think are important to consider. This lady that just left, said she lived on the Curtis. I was involved. I proposed that. I won the RFP to build the Curtis that was denied. Lenox doesn't have a lot of tall rooftops. You keep talking about putting antennas on rooftops. If the rooftops are only 30 feet tall and carry needs to be 50, 70, 80 feet, 100 feet off, if you've got maple trees and pine trees, a rooftop's not gonna work. Building that we're in, does it have historic designation? Can you change that cupola? Can you touch that cupola without going through Mass Historic and Lenox Historic and everything else? So there aren't a lot of rooftops that can be used. So, you're gonna be looking at either small cells or small towers. But one of the things, I understand you're pretty deep into this process, but one of the things I really encourage you to look at with David is looking through your draft proposal. You talk about concealed towers or slick sticks for the predominant use. And if you look at what happened behind the Stockbridge Inn in Stockbridge, they built a brown slick stick, a flagpole. And each carrier wants 6 to 9, maybe 12 antennas. And there, one carrier took 2 or 3 slots in that pole to achieve their results. So what did they do? They built another tower right next to it. And so do you want multiple towers, or do you want one tower that's properly designed that can accommodate multiple carriers? And you may think, well, multiple small towers are fine, but now you have, access roads and utilities and you're just kind of compounding the situation. You can do closely mounted antennas that may not be in a radome, or you can put closely mounted antennas with a kind of a shroud or rain dome. But if you start basically saying that it's either got to be a pine tree or a slick stick, you're going to discourage the carriers, from coming. So again, if you have time, just kind of consider if there are ways to encourage the carriers, not just make it so you don't get sued, because David will do a good job making sure you don't get sued. I guarantee that. But also, I have some carriers that are interested, and, we're looking to improve the service. We're already working on a couple of places in Lenox and Stockbridge, and hopefully, we'll be back before you with an application. And, I hope it goes through town meeting. I hope you're successful in that, and that you can wrap this up. Small cells are a good idea in some cases. I know you approved one for Verizon across from Tanglewood. There's a small cell. Does a very small amount of coverage for that small cell. And even that still requires a structure, still requires power and fiber and stuff to look at. So it's not, those aren't invisible either. If you go and look at that one, it's, it's still a structure. It's a small structure, but it's still a structure. So, I guess from my perspective is if I come in and propose developing a new tower structure, it would be for 3 or 4 carriers. And how does that work? If it's a slick stick, it almost does it, because each carrier now wants a 12-foot long antenna, and they want several of them. And you put that into a flagpole, it makes it complicated. I mean, even replacing the flagpole right here in front of the fire station, that's a potential, but you're gonna see it. So, unfortunately, to make these things work, you have to see it. But anyways.
Hey, Chris, what do you call what kind of design is the tower at Lenox Fit? What do you call that?
That's a monopole. And that was built, I think it was 100 feet, and they extended it to 120 feet, as my recollection. And that's not a real super attractive site. I mean, that could have been, done a little bit differently. I got that permitted and then left the company and went on, so I didn't end up building that. But yeah, that could have been organized a little differently it was originally proposed, we were gonna make it look like a farm silo. Put the antennas on, build a silo and put them on that, but that was thought to be even more massive, to see a big silo that close to the road. So there are a lot of ways to do things, and the flagpole slick stick may not be a bad idea. If you go east on the Mass Turnpike at the Mass Highway Garage on the left-hand side, you'll see there's a flagpole slick stick type tower there. It's been there for probably 15 years, and the radomes have been blown off more times than they've been on. So, it's constant maintenance issues and making sure accessing it, you need a man lift or a bucket truck to get up inside of there. These are discussions, I'm happy to have another time. I don't want to take your time, but, yeah, please just consider some other ways. Excuse me, not just the slick stick, but if you're further down that process and I'm too late for comments, then. Yeah.
Where is the slick stick that you refer to in Stockbridge?
They're right behind the Stockbridge Inn, and really you have to go from the.
The Red Lion Inn?
No, Stockbridge Inn. If you're going down 102, before you cross under the turnpike on your
Yeah.
left-hand side, is the entrance. There's a,
I didn't even know there was a place. called
Before you get to
Stockbridge.
the Berkshire Theater place.
right, before
It's-
Berkshire Theater Group, but before you die.
On Route 7, not 102, Route 7.
Route 7,
End of the
sorry,
turnpike.
you're down Route 7, and before you cross under the turnpike,
Yeah,
on your left-hand side, there's a little inn.
okay.
Oh, okay, I know where you are.
And
Yeah.
you can't see it from there, you can see it from the turnpike. And there are at least 2 brown towers in there.
Okay.
So if you drive the turnpike and put your flashers on, you might be able to see it from there.
And
But anyways,
just, thank you, Chris, for your thoughts. That could be an example of where 2 shorter towers are in fact better than having 1 taller tower, because people don't notice them. So it's an example of why it's not automatically bad to have more towers. But yeah, it's part of that Venn diagram that the board is working with. It's like you're pulling from one direction from another. What more towers, fewer towers, more height, less height, visibility, camouflage, all of these things are competing for coming up with the right kinds of locations.
if I could just leave you with one last thing, when we built the tower at Lenox Fifth, there was the overlay district as you have now. Your current bylaw, allows wireless facilities, but only on 5 properties.
Mhm.
That was outside of the bylaw, outside of the overlay district, but you had in your bylaw at the time, your ability to grant a waiver.
Mhm.
And then when the bylaw was updated, that waiver was removed for whatever reason, that language was taken out.
Hmm.
You've talked about tonight, different waivers and giving yourself flexibility, please do it. Doesn't hurt. If you have the ability to make the decisions and have the authority to grant waivers or whatever, give yourself the power to do that rather than having to go to variance, having to go to court.
Mhm.
If we want to get better coverage in town and better service in town, let's do it. Let's do it right, but give yourself the ability to do that, because over the years, I've been approached to do something in town, and the only way we could have done it up until now was to bring an application before you, get denied, sue the town, go to court, and get it resolved. And that's not planning, not on my behalf or not on yours. That's not how we want to work. And so, give yourself the flexibility. Grant yourself some waivers. If you have, some things you can do, whether it's for the setbacks or the heights or whatever. Doesn't mean we're gonna get it. If I come in and beg and plead, it doesn't mean you're gonna give it to us. But if it's not there, you're preventing yourself from doing it. So that's all I would suggest. And thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Any other
I have a couple people on here.
comments, questions? No? Okay.
Liliana, no?
So, yeah.
All right, we have Scott Barrow.
Okay.
Let me see if I can you unmute yourself here? Because I don't have you muted.
I don't think we're here.
Okay, here we go.
There you go.
Hi, my name is Karen Beckwith. I'm married to Scott Barrow, and his name's coming up because it's his computer. We live at 14 Old Stockbridge Road. And I am really wanting to just sort of bring a point of view with a sort of bird's eye perspective on the village of Lenox. I strongly oppose having small cell units, I don't know what they're called, on rooftops, on anywhere near the historic village. And the reason is, I think if you take the bigger picture view of why we have shops in our town and why we have tourists in our town, it's because of that sort of purity of history that our town presents. And I want to remind this board of the wisdom of a man named Westinghouse, who came to our town and lived here and decided that it would be much more beautiful for the long life of the future if we didn't have electric wires strung up all up and down our streets. And to look up at the town hall or the Curtis or the library or any of the churches, any of the other historic buildings, and see all of that visual junk. I'm an interior designer and a painter. I paint landscapes. To look up at the roofs at what is the very doorway to the jewel of the Berkshires, which is the Lenox Village. This is something that we have to protect. And to look up on those rooftops right at the front door of the village, which is the Curtis or the town hall, is just unimaginable to me. I don't know how many chimneys there are in the Curtis. I think there's 7 or 8. And if all those chimneys are surrounded by cellular components, broadcasting, it is going to look like Queens. Have you guys ever been to Queens? We had a daughter who lived there and another daughter who was in college in New York, and we were in Queens a lot. And I can tell you, it's not a good look. So I would just really like the board to realize and protect the historic nature of this village and not to junk up every roof and every chimney with a bunch of trash, because that's what it looks like when you're done. It's awful. The second thing I'd like you to know is that in writing this bylaw, no matter how it finally irons out, and I know you guys all have your irons and your ironing boards and you're working hard on it. And again, like everyone else, both of us really appreciate the time that's gone into this. It's a tangle. But I would like you to generate a bylaw that protects the citizenry, the taxpayers of this town. People who live here full time, not Airbnb guests, not hotel guests, not people who are driving in from Stockbridge or Great Barrington to come and do a little shopping or have a little dinner or go see their kids at camp. Protect the people who live here by giving us our power in decision making, situation by situation. Do not give away our power. It is not fair. It is not right. This is an industry which is controlled by the FCC, who has no concern for human health at all, and their criteria is ancient. And this technology, it was born with the beginning of the technology, and it's a rigged game, and we all know that, and we know you know that. It is the technology that you guys are writing the bylaws for, in short order, will be replaced with satellites, which will give everyone the distance they need for their health, and hopefully, don't give our power away. Let us participate in the decisions about what's happening in our own yards. Thank you.
Okay, and then I think we have Courtney Gallardi.
Hi, guys. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. I'm 980 East Street in Lenox, but I also have a property in Pittsfield. As many of you know, I was blindsided by a tower. So when I hear tower developers wanting to give you guys the power to have waivers, if you can, to be able to make decisions, for me, the reason why we have a select board and we have a government is to protect us and to protect the residential qualities of why we came to the area. I lived in capital cities for 10 years. And there was lots of infrastructure, and I moved to the woods in Pittsfield to get away from that, to live on a quiet wooded lot on a dead end street. And I was blindsided by a 120-foot macro cell tower that was built 500 feet from my front door. And unfortunately, my children started vomiting in their beds and developing skin rashes. 17 of my neighbors got sick, 3 got cancer. And yes, this is currently in litigation. And so I want residents who are tax-paying year-round residents to have a say in the process, even if it takes a year. It is worth it for us to get it right. Gwen Miller had a great quote in the Eagle saying, we have the ability to do this and to do this right. I have been asking for over 18 months for the town of Lenox to please have a 1-hour consultation with an independent, experienced telecom lawyer who all they do for a living is write wireless zoning bylaws, to review what we have here and to strengthen it. Nobody is doubting that we need to be connected, that we want good wireless service. But how can we do this so that our zoning, our residential zoning, when people buy a house here, they expect that the residential zoning stays the same, that they are not blindsided by commercial and industrial infrastructure, and that we have the ability to voice our opinion and to be a part of this process. I would love to see the overlay maps versus setback maps. In Pittsfield, they were able to produce a 1,640-foot setback map, which left 10% of Pittsfield to which you were able to put properties on. Shelburne has a 3,000-foot setback from schools. It was mentioned the August 13th, 2021 litigation against the FCC, in which the DC Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that those 1996 limits were arbitrary and capricious. Somebody mentioned that they failed to protect children. They also failed to protect seniors. They failed to protect people who had sensitivities, those with neurological issues, reproductive harm, and they fail to consider the cumulative amount of wireless radiation that we are subjected to from all different sources. And there is no agency that's doing an ongoing review of this. So some places have called moratoriums. So I'd like to think about what we can do for our schools as well. So please don't give away our power. This is echoed before. Please hire an independent telecom attorney to review, advise, and explain this to the Lenox residents. And please, we do need to be connected, but don't open the door to wireless without people say, because this is what got Pittsfield into trouble. So don't let it happen in Lenox, please. Thank you.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Checking to see if there's anybody else here with hands raised.
There's
That
quite
looks
a
like.
few people on there.
Yeah, the little hands right there are people that wanted to talk, so. I don't see anybody else with a hand raised now.
That was Courtney that just spoke.
I have.
Yeah.
Lisa.
Yeah.
So, okay. So I think we'll close any public comment. Thank you all for your comments. We'll take it all under consideration. So do we want to, it's pushing 8:30.
Yeah.
So, we want to call it quits for tonight? And
Can I just ask, so I'm the one who mostly pulled together the current draft, and I know there are some issues that still need to be cleaned up because I transposed one little area, but we're gonna take it out anyway.
Just thank you so much for doing
Yeah,
that.
this was great. Having
Because
this.
it's
It made things a
really,
lot easier
it's
to follow.
impressive.
Thank you, thank you.
So
I
nice
got,
to hire you.
oh, thank you.
I wanted to, I would like to hire you if you're not gonna be retiring in January.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So I personally, since I have basically got this memorized at this point,
Just, you know, it keeps you awake at night.
I love, yeah, can I just say-
More of an overarching question first?
Sure.
Before you start going to specifics. Are we still talking about doing a design standard? You know,
yeah, I think that it's
non-voting?
on my list. That's on my
Okay,
list.
All right.
So,
Part of
I didn't
which
even
has
feel
been
like-
developed already.
yeah, but it's this slick stick that Chris is talking about. So we never even talked to David about it, but I do, I kind of wrote questions down about where David had put comments into the draft, which I think we resolved the sort of first wave of comments he had. But now, you know, as always happens, every time you look at a version, you can keep
Right.
changing it. Can I maybe, once he comes, if he comes up for air this week from being sick with COVID, I know that it can really hit you hard, even if you've been boosted. Can I get with him personally and maybe go through my questions and come back with the board so we don't have to have long conversations?
Yeah.
Maybe like not to make decisions on my
Right.
own or anything for
Right.
the board, but to like narrow in on the key questions, say this is something he said, this is what the recommendation is, and so we can maybe go through it faster. And then if any of you have any comments, and you know, I'll talk to him also about the design standards. If any of you had any comments on or questions that we could resolve by next week or get answers to, please send them not to me because that would be serial
Yeah,
deliberation.
send them to Gwen.
Send them to Gwen and she can aggregate them and she can get with David or organize it at least.
Right.
So that, you know, I can give her what my resolution is, but I bet you I'm gonna maybe cover things that you see also.
I mean, you know, it seems like at times we were heading down 3 different roads,
Mhm.
but all at the same time. And, you know, it's because we're trying to actually hone in on the difficult areas.
Yes.
But, you know, this is, it's really difficult to figure out how to get this in writing.
Mhm.
Really difficult.
So we can do it. I think we can do it. I think I've got height and setback, you know, points to make. It's just a matter of how it looks. The use table for next time. And we could talk about whether, you know, towers are allowed in all zones or not in some zones or whatever the combo is. And then I did do benchmarking of other towns.
Yeah.
So I will have Gwen distribute that as part of the next packet or sooner or whatever. So I didn't want to like overwhelm you on this more than you already are.
So there's more information from the other towns?
There's
Because I know we
this,
had
I
some.
basically looked at how did towns that Gwen recommended I talk, you know, I look
Okay,
at their
so
bylaws.
it's a new set of information.
It's a new, it's like, what, how do they handle zoning? How do they handle setbacks? How do they handle height? And then there's like a notes page of like other stuff I saw in the bylaw that I was gonna ask David, would this be good phraseology for our bylaw?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
but again, and I will again say, I didn't really see anything in these other bylaws that was
Substantially different.
substantially different than our approach. I mean, if anything, it shows there are many ways you can write these things
Right.
that get the job done. And David, as he said, David, you're right. Some of them I could tell were from like 1998, Great Barrington, for example.
Yeah.
Others were more modern, others were somewhere in between. I couldn't tell you for sure, but at least, you know, we can see what's out there.
What is one of the
sampling.
things you're gonna go over the difference between co-location and site
Yes.
sharing? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, co-location and site
Yeah,
sharing,
I
also
mean-
concealed and camouflaged is on the list.
Yeah.
Looking at that location preferences, which now has both qualitative and prescriptive in it. I also want to double check with our attorney, Joel Bard, to see if some stuff from the design standards still need to come over. I did pull some stuff already. But if Joel says we can leave it in the design standards, we'll leave it in the design standards.
Okay, yeah.
But otherwise, we're getting there. Yeah.
Sometimes it doesn't feel.
No, we're there.
Yeah.
Next time you get it, it will be shorter.
I think that would be great, so if we meet with him and then we can, it's like, I mean, the supplemental review thing. Do you want, if that's what you wanna call it,
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that there are so many, even a slew of small things that still have to be kind of nailed down.
I'll go down with him. I'll go through them with him with their recommendations and I'll try to figure out a way to like show you what the reco was, maybe a table or something like that. But I've been trying to kind of keep it clean.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm without showing you all the changes, maybe just highlighted or I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's just, you
Yeah,
know,
the highlighting changes, the track changes business with things underlined and.
I know.
and strike throughs and all that makes it very difficult to try to read.
yeah. I
So,
mean,
you know, if you make a change and then, you know, there's like a whole new section of text, yeah.
Just
have it
highlight it and say,
highlighted.
this is what we swapped out something for.
yeah,
Right.
yeah. And
That's
even
fine.
those side boxes, you know, all of that explanatory material has been really helpful as far as like what happens.
The reasoning for stuff.
Rather than, you know, just having.
Oh, you mean comments? You like
Yeah,
comments?
just in general, you know.
So you like comments, but not track changes?
I don't know what I like, right? I'm tired.
Dinner.
No, yes, I mean, it's, you know, in some cases, I went back and comments in, you know, last year's version, literally.
Yeah.
You know, because it was like.
Have
Did we
somebody
also
mute.
record this meeting tonight?
Yes.
Just telephone.
That might be
Somebody,
David's, I don't know.
David? Thank
Yeah,
you for
yeah.
your
Dave, is
signature.
that,
so have we adjourned?
No, but when
Okay.
we adjourn, I actually have a little piece of information. I had a call today from a former town select board member who said he had had an inquiry from a person in town who is looking to do a citizen's petition to hold off on the vote at this town meeting coming up. So that's not for wide publication,
Well, it's
but on the
probably
other hand, you know.
Well, it's recorded now.
It's recorded now,
Citizen
exactly. If anybody
petition.
listens to the end of it, but I feel like if somebody, you know, if somebody made a call and said, you know, there was a person who was looking into that, I felt like it was information the board should know. So that's just another one of these little things dropping in.
Yep.
So what would that show up on a warrant before
That
our
would be on
article?
on the warrant to more or less like table,
Table it.
Table.
you know,
Right.
except.
Okay. All set?
All said, I move to adjourn.
Well, wait,
Wait,
hang on, so Dave, you still there?
Yes, I am.
And away.
Thank you very much. We're slogging through it, so thank you for hanging with us and wading through it with us.
And get well soon. Thank you for signing on when you're not well.
Right.
I know that you really feel ownership about this.
You guys are doing such a great job, just digging through all the corners of this to try to get to the right place. I think you're doing a great job.
We appreciate the vote of confidence because at nights when we have, you know, all the battling aspects of this in the same room, but we're all being fairly civil, so that's really helpful. Thank you very much.
All right, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay.
Aye.
Very good.
Right, okay, get better.
Get better, David. Get better.